The morning dew still clung to the corn stalks when Robert Caldwell pulled his 1994 Chevy pickup into the First Liberty Bank parking lot. The truck's engine coughed twice before falling silent, rust flaking from the door as he stepped out onto the freshly paved asphalt. His worn leather boots, caked with dried mud from yesterday's fieldwork, left faint impressions on the pristine pavement. As he approached the gleaming glass doors, his reflection showed a man whose weathered face told stories of seasons endured and battles fought against nature itself. But what happened next would shake the very foundations of this small Iowa town's understanding of success, wealth, and the dangerous assumptions we make based on appearances alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The contrast between Bobby's appearance and the bank's polished interior couldn't have been more striking. First, Liberty Bank prided itself on being the financial cornerstone of Millfield, Iowa, with its imported marble floors and crystal chandeliers that sparkled like morning frost. The lobby smelled of leather chairs and fresh coffee, a world away from the earthy scent of soil and grain that clung to Bobby's flannel shirt. At 7:45 a.m., the bank had just opened, and only a handful of employees were present, including Emily Torres, a recent college graduate working her first month as a teller. Bobby removed his faded John Deere cap as he entered, revealing silver hair that caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows. His calloused hands, marked by decades of working the land, clutched a manila folder that had seen better days. The edges were worn soft from handling, and a coffee stain marked one corner like a badge of honor. As he walked toward the reception desk, his boots echoed against the marble with a rhythm that spoke of purpose rather than hesitation. Emily looked up from her computer terminal, her welcoming smile faltering slightly as she took in Bobby's appearance. His Carhartt jacket had patches at the elbows, and his jeans bore the authentic wear of actual labor, not the designer distressing popular among the town's younger crowd. Yet there was something in his steady blue eyes that commanded attention, a quiet dignity that years of facing nature's unpredictability had instilled. "Good morning," Bobby said, his voice carrying the gentle gravel of someone who'd spent more time talking to crops than crowds. "I have an appointment with Mr. Pemberton about a business loan." Emily's fingers hesitated over her keyboard. She glanced at the appointment schedule, then back at Bobby, as if trying to reconcile the man before her with whatever notation appeared on her screen. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, the question mark in her voice unmistakable. "That's right," Bobby nodded, setting his folder on the counter with deliberate care. 8 o'clock appointment, might be a few minutes early. Behind Emily, through the glass partition that separated the lobby from the administrative offices, Harold Pemberton was visible at his desk. The bank manager, dressed in a crisp navy suit that probably cost more than Bobby's truck, was arranging papers with the precision of someone who believed order and success were synonymous. His office walls displayed certificates and awards, each frame aligned with mathematical exactness. "I'll let Mr. Pemberton know you're here," Emily said, reaching for the phone. As she spoke quietly into the receiver, Bobby noticed her glance repeatedly between him and the manager's office, as if measuring the distance between two different worlds. The waiting area held leather chairs that looked more decorative than functional. Bobby chose to remain standing, his eyes taking in the framed photographs lining the walls. Images of Millfield's prosperity through the decades, showing ribbon cuttings and groundbreaking ceremonies. He recognized some faces from the older photos, including his own father standing in the background of a 1960s Harvest Festival picture. Harold Pemberton emerged from his office with the practiced stride of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. His shoes clicked against the marble like a metronome, each step measured and confident. As he approached, his eyes performed a quick inventory of Bobby's appearance, from the worn boots to the weathered hands, and his expression shifted subtly from professional courtesy to something closer to condescension. "Mr. Caldwell." Pemberton extended his hand, though his grip was notably brief. "I understand you're here about a loan application." "That's right," Bobby replied, meeting the manager's eyes directly. "Looking to expand my operation. Got some plans I'd like to discuss." "Ah!" Pemberton's eyebrows rose slightly, as if the word expansion, coming from someone who looked like Bobby, was inherently amusing. Of course. Why don't we step into my office?" He gestured toward the glass door, though his body language suggested he was already calculating how quickly he could conclude this meeting. The office smelled of furniture polish and subtle cologne. Pemberton's desk was a testament to organization, with a leather blotter, Mont Blanc pen set, and computer monitor positioned at perfect angles. Family photos in silver frames showed a wife in designer clothes and children in private school uniforms. The contrast with Bobby's simple life couldn't have been more pronounced. "Please, have a seat," Pemberton said, gesturing to one of two chairs facing his desk. Bobby sat, his folder still clutched in his hands like a farmer holding seeds for planting. The leather chair seemed to resist his weight, as if even the furniture recognized him as an outsider. "Now then," Pemberton began, settling into his high-backed executive chair, "what kind of loan were you thinking about? We have several agricultural programs for small farmers. Perhaps something to help with equipment repairs or seed purchases." The assumption in his tone was clear. Whatever Bobby needed, it would be modest, probably desperate, and certainly within the realm of traditional farming struggles. Bobby had heard this tone before, from suppliers, from other businessmen, from anyone who saw the dirt under his nails before seeing the vision in his mind. "Actually," Bobby said, opening his folder with deliberate care, "I'm looking at a more substantial investment. There's an opportunity to revolutionize crop distribution in the Midwest, and I need capital to make it happen." Pemberton's polite smile flickered, replaced momentarily by surprise, before professional skepticism took over. "Revolutionize crop distribution? That's quite ambitious, Mr. Caldwell. Perhaps we should start with something more realistic?" Through the glass walls, Emily watched the interaction while pretending to organize deposit slips. She'd seen this dance before, the way Pemberton's shoulders would straighten when dealing with the town's prominent citizens, how his voice would modulate depending on the perceived importance of his visitor. But there was something different about the farmer in the patched jacket, a quiet confidence that seemed immune to the manager's subtle dismissals. "Realistic," Bobby repeated the word, tasting it like soil samples from a new field. "Mr. Pemberton, what's realistic changes when you understand the full picture. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've brought some documentation that might help clarify things." He pulled several sheets from his folder, each one carefully preserved despite the folder's worn exterior. Financial statements, projections, and what appeared to be contracts caught the morning light streaming through Pemberton's corner office windows. The manager's expression shifted again, this time to poorly concealed surprise at the professional quality of the documents. "You see," Bobby continued, his weathered hands moving over the papers with surprising grace, "Caldwell Acres isn't just a family farm anymore. We've developed a new distribution model that could change how fresh produce reaches consumers across 3 states. Pemberton leaned forward slightly, his earlier dismissiveness wavering as his banker's instincts engaged with the numbers on the pages. But prejudice, like deep-rooted weeds, doesn't surrender easily to logic. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, regaining his composure and pushing the papers back across the desk without thorough examination, "while I appreciate your Enthusiasm. First Liberty Bank has certain standards for business loans of this magnitude. We typically work with established corporations, not individual farmers looking to, well, experiment. The word experiment hung in the air like morning mist, heavy with condescension. Bobby's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of a reaction he'd learned to control through years of facing similar attitudes. Established, Bobby said quietly. Interesting word choice. Tell me, Mr. Pemberton, how long has your family been in Millfield? The question seemed to catch the banker off guard. Well, I moved here 5 years ago from Chicago, but I don't see what that has to do with... My family's been farming this land for 4 generations. Bobby interrupted gently. Started with 40 acres and a dream after my great-grandfather returned from World War I. Every generation built on what came before, adapted to change, survived droughts and floods and market crashes. If that's not established, I'm not sure what is. Pemberton shifted in his chair, straightening his already perfect tie. Be that as it may, Mr. Caldwell, tradition doesn't automatically qualify someone for a 7-figure loan. The number hung between them like a thunderclap. 7 figures. Bobby watched as Pemberton's eyes widened slightly, confirming his suspicion that the banker hadn't even looked closely enough at the documents to see the loan amount. 7 figures seems like a lot for a small farm operation, Pemberton continued, his tone now mixing condescension with amusement. Perhaps you've made an error in your calculations. These things can be confusing without proper financial training. Through the glass, Emily saw Marcus Williams, the security guard, pause in his rounds to observe the meeting. Marcus, an Army veteran who'd returned to Millfield 3 years ago, had developed a 6th sense for tension. He'd noticed how Bobby had nodded respectfully to him upon entering, the kind of acknowledgement that spoke of shared understanding between people who'd earned their calices. No error, Bobby replied, his voice steady as a fence post. But I understand your hesitation. Most people see what they expect to see. Farmer walks in looking like me. You figure I need a few thousand to fix a tractor or buy seed. But what if I told you Caldwell Acres processes and ships more organic produce than any operation within 200 miles? What if I mentioned our contracts with major grocery chains in Chicago, Minneapolis, and Kansas City? Pemberton's smile had become strained, like cheap wire stretched too tight. Mr. Caldwell, I'm sure you run a fine operation, but claims like these need substantial verification. We can't simply... Verification, Bobby interrupted again, pulling more documents from his folder. Like these distribution contracts? Or maybe these letters of intent from 3 major food processing companies looking to partner with us? Or perhaps these bank statements showing our annual revenue? He laid each document on Pemberton's desk, with the precision of a surgeon, creating a paper trail that told a story the banker hadn't expected. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shadows across the desk that seemed to divide the 2 men's worlds even further. Pemberton glanced at the papers, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and the dawning realization that he might have miscalculated. But pride, especially wounded pride, rarely admits defeat easily. These documents will need to be verified by our underwriting department, he said stiffly. And even if they check out, a loan of this size requires approval from senior management. It's not something I can simply authorize. I understand, Bobby said, gathering his documents, with the same care he'd shown displaying them. But let me ask you something, Mr. Pemberton. When you looked at me this morning, what did you see? Because I'm betting it wasn't the CEO of a multi-million-dollar agricultural enterprise. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against the windows. Emily, still watching from her station, saw Pemberton's face flush slightly. She'd witnessed enough of these interactions to recognize the moment when assumptions collided with reality. I think we should schedule a follow-up meeting, Pemberton said finally, his voice carefully modulated to suggest this had been his plan all along. Once our team has had time to review your application properly. Bobby stood, his movements unhurried. That's fine. But understand something, Mr. Pemberton. This loan isn't about me proving something to you. It's about an opportunity that could bring hundreds of jobs to Millfield, establish a regional distribution center, and put this town on the map for agricultural innovation. Every day we delay is a day our competitors get closer to beating us to market. He placed his worn cap back on his head, the gesture somehow transforming him from supplicant to sovereign. I'll expect your call by end of business tomorrow. If First Liberty isn't interested in being part of Millfield's future, there are banks in Des Moines that understand the value of vision over appearance. The threat was delivered without malice, more like a weather forecast than a warning. Bobby turned to leave, nodding again to Marcus as he passed. The security guard straightened slightly, recognizing something in Bobby's bearing that Pemberton had missed entirely. Oh, and Mr. Pemberton, Bobby paused at the door. You might want to Google Caldwell Agricultural Innovations before you make your final decision. Sometimes, the future comes dressed in work boots. The glass door closed with a soft whisper, leaving Pemberton alone with the lingering scent of soil and possibility. Through the window, he watched Bobby's old truck pull away, its engine coughing the same complaint it had voiced upon arrival. But something about the scene felt different now, as if the morning light had shifted to reveal details previously hidden in shadow. Emily returned to her work, but her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. She'd grown up in Millfield, had heard stories about the Caldwell farm from her grandmother. Stories about how they'd survived the farm crisis of the 80s when others had sold out, how they'd been among the first to embrace organic farming when everyone said it was a fad. The morning continued its measured progression, customers coming and going with their routine transactions. But something had changed in the atmosphere of First Liberty Bank, a subtle shift like the barometric pressure before a storm. Pemberton remained in his office, occasionally glancing at his computer screen with increasing agitation. At 10:30 a.m., just as the morning coffee was wearing off and the bank was settling into its mid-morning rhythm, Pemberton's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number that made him straighten in his chair. Victoria Chen, President and CEO of First Liberty Bank's parent company, Midwest Financial Group. Through the glass, Emily watched as Pemberton's expression cycled through professional, greeting, confusion, and then something approaching panic. His free hand gestured unconsciously as he spoke, the kind of movements people make when trying to explain the inexplicable. The conversation lasted exactly 12 minutes. When Pemberton hung up, he sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the spot where Bobby Caldwell had sat just hours before. Then, with movements that seemed to pain him, he typed something into his computer. The search results for Caldwell Agricultural Innovations filled his screen. Article after article appeared. Iowa farmer revolutionizes organic distribution. Caldwell's cold chain. Innovation reduces food waste by 40%. Tech meets agriculture. How one family farm became a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Pemberton's day had begun with the simple certainty of a man who believed he could measure worth with a glance. It would end with the uncomfortable realization that sometimes the most profound lessons come dressed in patched denim and worn leather boots. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Bobby Caldwell steered his truck down the familiar gravel road leading to Caldwell Acres. The manila folder lay on the passenger seat, its contents no longer needed for proof, but serving as a reminder of the morning's encounter. As he drove, his mind drifted back through the years to the moments that had shaped both him and the land he called home. It had started with a promise made beside a hospital bed 35 years ago. Sarah Caldwell, his wife of barely 5 years, had gripped his hand with surprising strength despite the cancer that was claiming her. "Don't just survive, Bobby," she had whispered, her green eyes still bright despite the pain. "Make something that matters. Make something that lasts." Those words had echoed through every dawn that followed, through every decision that transformed Caldwell Acres from a struggling family farm into something nobody had expected. The memory of Sarah's faith had been the seed from which everything else had grown. The old barn on the eastern edge of Caldwell Acres still stood as a monument to that pivotal moment when everything changed. Bobby parked his truck and walked toward it, his boots crunching on the gravel that had witnessed countless transformations. The weathered wood held memories like rings in a tree trunk, each season of struggle and triumph etched into its grain. After Sarah's death, the farm had nearly failed. Bobby had spent months in a fog of grief, going through the motions of daily chores while the business side of farming crumbled around him. Bills piled up like autumn leaves, and the bank, ironically, First Liberty Bank under different management, had begun sending foreclosure warnings. It was Jim Henderson, their neighbor to the north, who had finally shaken Bobby from his stupor. Jim had found him sitting in this very barn one October evening, staring at nothing, the foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist. "Sarah wouldn't want this," Jim had said simply, settling his weathered frame onto a hay bale. "She married you because she saw something in you that maybe you can't see right now." Bobby remembered the anger that had flared up, hot and sudden. "She's gone, Jim. What she wanted doesn't matter anymore." "That's where you're wrong, son." Jim's voice had carried the weight of someone who'd buried his own share of dreams. "What she wanted is the only thing that matters now. You can honor her memory by giving up, or you can honor it by becoming the man she believed you could be." That night, Bobby had sat in the barn until dawn, surrounded by the ghosts of failed harvests and unpaid debts. As the first light crept through the gaps in the walls, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits, he made a decision. He would save the farm, but more than that, he would transform it into something that would have made Sarah proud. The transformation began with education. Bobby enrolled in night classes at the community college, studying agricultural science and business management while working the farm during the day. His professors, initially skeptical of the older student in mud-stained jeans, soon recognized a hunger for knowledge that surpassed that of their traditional students. He learned about soil chemistry, studying how different combinations of nutrients could dramatically improve yield. He discovered the emerging science of precision agriculture, where GPS technology could guide tractors with inch-perfect accuracy. But most importantly, he learned about market dynamics, how the real money in farming wasn't in growing crops, but in controlling the supply chain. The first breakthrough came in 1992, during a particularly harsh drought that devastated farms across Iowa. While his neighbors watched their corn wither in the fields, Bobby's crops survived. He had invested in an experimental irrigation system, mortgaging equipment he could barely afford to lose. The system used sensors to detect soil moisture levels and delivered water with surgical precision, reducing waste by 60%. "You're gambling with your future," Harold Thompson, then president of the local farmers co-op, had warned him. "Stick to what we know works." But Bobby had remembered Sarah's words about making something that matters. The gamble paid off. That year, Caldwell Acres was one of the few farms in the county to meet its contracts. The profit wasn't just in the sales, it was in the reputation. Buyers began to see Caldwell Acres as reliable, innovative, and forward-thinking. The next innovation came from an unlikely source. Bobby had been delivering produce to a restaurant in Des Moines when he overheard the chef complaining about the quality of vegetables from their regular supplier. "By the time they reach us, they've lost," Half their flavor, the chef had said. I'd pay double for truly fresh produce. That conversation sparked an idea that would revolutionize Caldwell Acres. Bobby began researching cold chain logistics, the science of keeping produce at optimal temperatures from harvest to delivery. He discovered that most farms treated transportation as an afterthought, loading produce onto trucks without considering how temperature fluctuations during transit affected quality. Using knowledge gained from his night classes and countless hours of research, Bobby developed a proprietary system. He retrofitted old refrigerated trucks with advanced temperature monitoring systems, creating different climate zones for different types of produce. Leafy greens required different conditions than root vegetables, and Bobby's system could maintain multiple environments in a single trailer. The investment was staggering. Bobby sold off peripheral equipment, took out loans against the farm, and even sold Sarah's grandmother's antique dining set, a decision that had kept him awake for nights. But he remembered Jim Henderson's words about honoring Sarah's memory through achievement, not preservation. The system worked better than anyone had imagined. Restaurants that received Caldwell produce reported that vegetables arrived as fresh as if they'd been picked hours ago. Because they had been. Bobby's early morning harvests could reach Chicago restaurants by lunch, maintaining farm-fresh quality that commanded premium prices. Word spread through the culinary community. Chefs began requesting Caldwell produce specifically, willing to pay 30 to 40% more for the guaranteed quality. Within 2 years, Bobby had expanded his fleet to 6 trucks, each equipped with his proprietary system. But success brought new challenges. Larger agricultural corporations took notice of Caldwell's innovations. They offered to buy him out, sending representatives in expensive suits to make increasingly generous offers. Bobby refused them all, remembering something his father had once said. Land isn't just soil and crops, it's legacy. Instead of selling, Bobby did something unexpected. He began sharing his knowledge with other small farmers, helping them implement similar systems. Rising tides lift all boats, he would tell them, unconsciously echoing Sarah's philosophy about making something that matters. The decision to help competitors baffled many business advisors, but Bobby understood something they didn't. By elevating the entire regional farming community, he was creating a network of quality suppliers that could compete with industrial agriculture. Restaurants and grocery chains began to see the Midwest not as a source of bulk commodities, but as a region capable of producing premium, artisanal quality produce. By 2010, Caldwell Agricultural Innovations had become a recognized leader in sustainable farming practices. Bobby had pioneered techniques in crop rotation that increased soil health while reducing the need for chemical fertilizers. He'd developed partnerships with Iowa State University's agricultural program, allowing students to intern at Caldwell Acres and learn about innovative farming techniques. The crown jewel of his operations was the Agricultural Innovation Center. Built on land that had once been considered too rocky for cultivation, the center served as both a research facility and a training ground for young farmers. Its gleaming solar panels and wind turbines made it energy self-sufficient, while its laboratories developed new techniques for organic pest control and soil rehabilitation. Bobby walked through the center now, checking on various experiments. In progress, in one greenhouse, heirloom tomato varieties were being tested for drought resistance. In another, vertical farming techniques were being refined to maximize space efficiency. Each project represented not just potential profit, but a step toward more sustainable agriculture. The success hadn't come without sacrifice. Bobby had never remarried, pouring all his energy into the farm and its evolution. There were times late at night in the empty farmhouse when loneliness crept in like ground fog. But then he would walk through the fields at dawn, see the hundreds of employees whose families depended on Caldwell Acres, witness the young farmers, learning techniques that would sustain them for generations, and know that he had honored Sarah's wish. The loans he'd taken out over the years had all been repaid, most ahead of schedule. Bobby had developed relationships with banks in larger cities, institutions that understood innovation and saw beyond appearances. First, Liberty Bank had missed out on financing several expansions, their conservatism costing them hundreds of thousands in interest income. It was this history of being underestimated that had prompted Bobby to give First Liberty another chance. The new distribution center he planned would create 200 jobs in Millfield, establish the town as a logistics hub for the tri-state area, and bring in millions in annual revenue. He'd thought that surely this time they would see beyond the muddy boots and worn clothes. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very success that banks in Chicago and Minneapolis recognized instantly was invisible to the institution in his own hometown. It reminded him of something his grandmother used to say: "Familiarity breeds blindness. People see what they've always seen, not what's actually there." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the fields, Bobby's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, with a Chicago area code. "Mr. Caldwell? This is Victoria Chen, president of Midwest Financial Group. I understand you met with our Millfield branch manager this morning about a loan application?" Bobby's weathered hand tightened slightly on the phone. "That's right. Mr. Pemberton seemed skeptical about our proposal." There was a pause, then a sigh that carried the weight of institutional embarrassment. "Mr. Caldwell, I've just finished reviewing your file, including some research into Caldwell Agricultural Innovations. I must apologize for any misunderstanding that may have occurred during your meeting." "Misunderstanding," Bobby repeated, his voice neutral. Through the Innovation Center's windows, he could see workers preparing for the evening shift, their movements efficient and purposeful. "I've been reading about your cold chain innovations, your sustainable farming practices, the agricultural education programs you've established. Frankly, Mr. Caldwell, I'm embarrassed that our branch manager didn't recognize the significance of your operation." Bobby walked to the window, watching a group of interns learning about hydroponic systems. "People see what they expect to see, Miss Chen. I've learned not to take it personally. Nevertheless, it's unacceptable. I've also discovered that you've been banking with our competitors for most of your expansion projects over the past decade. That's a failure on our part, not yours." The admission surprised Bobby. In his experience, banks rarely acknowledged missed opportunities, preferring to maintain a facade of infallibility. "I'll be flying to Iowa tomorrow morning," Victoria continued. "I'd like to meet with you personally, not just about this loan, but about establishing a comprehensive relationship between Midwest Financial Group and Caldwell Agricultural Innovations. Would 9 a.m. work for you?" Bobby considered the offer. Part of him wanted to decline, to take his business to the institutions that had believed in him from the start. But he thought about the message it would send to people like Emily, the young teller who'd witnessed his treatment that morning, and Marcus, the security guard who'd shown him respect when others hadn't. "I'll be there," he said finally. "But Ms. Chen, I have one condition. Name it. I want the meeting to include Mr. Pemberton, not to embarrass him, but because I believe in education. Sometimes the best lessons come from our mistakes." Another pause, then, "That's remarkably gracious of you, Mr. Caldwell. I agree. We'll see you at 9 a.m. Boom. After ending the call, Bobby stood in the fading light, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The Innovation Center hummed with activity around him, a testament to what could be achieved when vision overcame prejudice. He pulled out his worn wallet and extracted a faded photograph. Sarah in their first year of marriage, standing in front of the old barn, her smile radiant with possibility. He'd carried it through every challenge, every triumph, every moment, when the weight of building something meaningful had threatened to overwhelm him. "We made something that matters," he whispered to the image. "Something that lasts." That evening, as Bobby drove home in his ancient pickup, he passed through downtown Millfield. The town had changed little since his childhood. Main Street still, lined with family-owned businesses that had served generations. But change was coming, whether people recognized it or not. The distribution center would bring new families to town, new energy, new possibilities. He parked outside Maggie's Corner cafe, where locals had gathered for coffee and gossip since before he was born. Inside, the familiar warmth of grilled cheese and coffee enveloped him. Maggie herself, now in her 70s, but still manning the counter, looked up with a smile. "Bobby Caldwell! Haven't seen you in town during the week in ages. What's the occasion?" "Had some business at the bank," he replied, sliding onto a worn stool at the counter. "First Liberty? How'd that go?" Maggie poured coffee without being asked, a ritual decades in the making. "About like you'd expect, but sometimes things have a way of working out." At a nearby table, he overheard familiar voices discussing the morning's events. News traveled fast in Millfield, and apparently word of his visit to the bank had already made the rounds. "Heard Bobby Caldwell was at First Liberty this morning," Dale Patterson, owner of the hardware store, was saying. "Wonder what that's about." "Probably trying to get a loan for new equipment," replied Frank Morrison, whose family ran the local grain elevator. "Times are tough for small farmers." Bobby smiled into his coffee cup. Let them speculate. Tomorrow would bring its own revelations. He thought about the plans tucked safely in his office. Architectural drawings for the distribution center, projected employment figures, economic impact studies. Millfield was about to discover that sometimes the biggest changes come in familiar packages. As he sat in the cafe, watching the evening routines of his neighbors unfold, Bobby reflected on the nature of perception and success. How many other stories were hidden behind familiar faces? How many innovations were dismissed because they came from unexpected sources? His phone buzzed with a text message from his operations manager. "Chicago orders confirmed for tomorrow. 3 restaurants adding us to their preferred supplier list. Also, the university wants to discuss expanding the internship program." The success wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about proving that innovation could thrive anywhere, that wisdom wasn't confined to boardrooms and fancy degrees. Every small farmer who adopted his techniques, every young person who found a career in agricultural technology, every restaurant that served fresher, better produce, they were all part of Sarah's legacy. Later that night, alone in the farmhouse, where 5 generations of Caldwells had lived, Bobby sat at the kitchen table reviewing documents for tomorrow's meeting. The house was quiet, except for the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, a sound that had marked time through triumph and tragedy alike. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and began outlining his vision for the distribution center, but his thoughts kept returning to the morning's encounter with Pemberton. The dismissal, the assumptions, the barely concealed amusement, they were all part of a pattern he'd experienced throughout his journey. Success, Bobby had learned, wasn't just about achieving your goals. It was about changing the lens through which others viewed possibility itself. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't just be about securing a loan. It would be about shifting perspectives, opening eyes, and perhaps inspiring others to look beyond surface appearances. The moon had risen over the cornfields by the time Bobby finished his preparations. As he climbed the stairs to bed, he paused at the window overlooking the farm. The Innovation Center's security lights cast a soft glow over the landscape, illuminating the intersection of tradition and progress that defined Caldwell Acres. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. Victoria Chen's visit represented more than just financial validation. It was a chance to demonstrate that true innovation often comes from unexpected places, wearing unexpected faces. Bobby thought about Emily, the young teller who'd witnessed his treatment at the bank. He wondered if she'd ever faced similar dismissals, if she'd ever been underestimated because of her age, her gender, or her background. Tomorrow's meeting might show her that such treatment wasn't inevitable, that persistence and excellence could overcome prejudice. He thought about Marcus, the security guard who'd offered respect when others hadn't. How many times had Marcus himself been judged by his uniform rather than his character? Tomorrow might reinforce his instinct to look deeper, to see the person beyond the appearance. And he thought about Harold Pemberton, whose worldview was about to be challenged. The banker's assumptions weren't unusual. They were symptomatic of a broader tendency to equate appearance with capability, polish with competence. Tomorrow's lesson might be uncomfortable, but discomfort often preceded growth. The antique clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Bobby prepared for bed. Through his window, he could see the fields stretching toward the horizon, the same view his great-grandfather had seen when he first broke ground here. The land endured, but everything else had changed. Methods, markets, possibilities. As sleep approached, Bobby's last thoughts were of Sarah. She'd seen potential where others saw only struggle, believed in transformation when others counseled acceptance. Tomorrow, her vision would be vindicated once again, not just through success, but through the ripple effects that success would create. The weathered farmer who'd walked into First Liberty Bank that morning would return tomorrow, his muddy boots and worn clothes unchanged. But this time, the bank would see what Sarah had always seen. Not just a farmer, but a visionary. Not just a loan applicant, but a catalyst for change. And perhaps in that recognition, others would begin to question their own assumptions, look past their own prejudices, and see the potential that exists in unexpected places. Because sometimes, the most profound transformations begin not with grand gestures, but with simple moments of recognition. The acknowledgement that wisdom, innovation, and success can wear any face, speak with any accent, and arrive in any vehicle, even a 1994 Chevy pickup with rust on the doors and dreams in the driver's seat. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Bobby's phone rang on Friday morning. He'd been awake for an hour already, reviewing documents and sipping coffee in his farmhouse kitchen. The caller ID showed First Liberty Bank's main number, and Bobby wondered briefly if the meeting was being cancelled. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Emily Torres from the bank. Ms. Chen asked me to call and confirm your 9 a.m. meeting. She's arriving from Chicago shortly and wanted to make sure everything was still on schedule." "Everything's set," Bobby replied, noting the respect in Emily's voice that had been absent the day before. "I'll be there." "There's one more thing, Mr. Caldwell. Ms. Chen asked if you'd be willing to meet in our main conference room instead of Mr. Pemberton's office. She felt it would be more appropriate for the discussion. The main conference room. Bobby knew it well, a grand space typically reserved for major corporate clients and community presentations. The shift in venue spoke volumes about how quickly perceptions could change. "That's fine. See you at 9. After hanging up, Bobby walked to his bedroom closet. For a moment, he considered the lone suit hanging there, purchased years ago for Sarah's funeral and rarely worn since. His hand hovered near it, then moved instead to his usual work clothes. He selected a clean but well-worn denim shirt, pressed khakis that had seen countless fields, and the same leather boots that had carried him through yesterday's encounter. The decision was deliberate. He'd spent too many years proving that worth. Wasn't measured by wardrobe to start pretending now. The drive to town took him past fields, awakening to the morning sun. Dew sparkled on corn silk, and the autumn air carried the earthy scent of approaching harvest. His truck, seemingly energized by the significance of the day, ran smoother than usual, its familiar rumble a comforting soundtrack to his thoughts. Millfield's main street was just stirring to life as Bobby parked in front of First Liberty Bank. The same parking space as yesterday, the same rusty truck among polished sedans. But this morning, he noticed Marcus Williams standing near the entrance, his posture straighter than usual. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said, opening the door with what seemed like extra formality. "They're expecting you in the main conference room." "Morning, Marcus, and it's just Bobby." Marcus smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Yes, sir. I mean, Bobby, things have been interesting around here since yesterday." Inside, the bank had a different energy. Employees who'd barely glanced at him yesterday now offered respectful nods. Emily Torres stood near the reception desk, her professional attire complemented by an expression of barely contained excitement. "Mr. Caldwell, good morning. Ms. Chen is already here. If you'll follow me." As they walked toward the conference room, Emily spoke quietly. "Mr. Caldwell, I hope you don't mind me saying, but my grandmother always spoke highly of your family. She worked at the farmer's market for 30 years, said Caldwell produce was always the best." "Maria Torres, who ran the flower stand?" Emily's eyes widened. "You remember her? She gave my wife her first gardening lessons. Good woman." "You have her smile." They reached the conference room doors, heavy oak panels with etched glass windows. Through them, Bobby could see several figures already seated at the long mahogany table. Emily opened the door, and conversation ceased as he entered. Victoria Chen stood immediately, crossing the room with confident strides. She was tall, impeccably, dressed in a charcoal suit with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in an elegant style. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for meeting with us. I'm Victoria Chen. Please call me Bobby." "Then you must call me Victoria." She gestured toward the table where Harold Pemberton sat, looking considerably less composed than the day before. "I believe you've met Mr. Pemberton." Pemberton rose awkwardly, extending his hand. "Mr. Caldwell, we appreciate you coming back." Bobby shook his hand without hesitation. "Mr. Pemberton, good to see you again." Also present were two other executives Bobby didn't recognize, tablets and folders arranged. Before them, with military precision, Victoria made introductions: James Mueller, Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending, and Patricia Gonzalez, Head of Agricultural Finance. "Please have a seat," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair that positioned Bobby at the head of the table, a subtle but significant placement. As he settled in, he noticed a comprehensive display had been set up. Large screens showed aerial views of Caldwell Acres, financial charts, and what appeared to be news articles about his innovations. "Before we begin," Victoria said, returning to her seat, "I want to address yesterday's meeting directly. Mr. Caldwell, Bobby, you deserved better from us. First, Liberty Bank failed to recognize not just a valuable client, but a pioneering force in agricultural innovation." Pemberton shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the polished table surface. "What concerns me more," Victoria continued, "is that this failure represents a systemic issue in how we evaluate potential. We've been so focused on traditional markers of success that we've become blind to innovation when it arrives in unexpected forms." She touched a button on a remote, and the screens filled with images: Bobby's cold chain trucks, the Agricultural Innovation Center, graphs showing the growth of Caldwell Acres over 3 decades. "Your operation has revolutionized regional agriculture," Patricia Gonzalez said, leaning forward. "The cold chain logistics system you developed has become a case study at 3 major universities. Your sustainable farming practices have reduced water usage by 40% while increasing yields. These aren't just business achievements, they're transformative innovations." James Mueller nodded, consulting his tablet. The financial metrics are equally impressive. Consistent year-over-year growth of 15%, debt-to-equity ratio that would make any CFO envious, and a default rate of 0 across all your financial obligations. Bobby listened quietly, his weathered hands resting calmly on the table. He'd lived these achievements, built them day by day, season by season. Hearing them catalogued this way felt strange, like watching someone else's life story. "But what impresses me most," Victoria said, "is what you've done for the broader farming community. You didn't just succeed, you lifted others with you. The training programs, the shared technologies, the mentorship of young farmers. That's the kind of leadership that builds regions, not just businesses." She paused, allowing her words to settle in the room. "Which brings us to your current proposal. The distribution center you're planning isn't just another expansion. It's a transformative project that could establish Millfield as a major agricultural hub. We've reviewed your plans overnight." The screens shifted to display architectural renderings of the proposed distribution center, a sprawling complex with solar panels, wind turbines, and state-of-the-art loading facilities designed to maintain perfect temperature control from storage to shipment. "The loan you're requesting is substantial," Victoria continued, "but conservative relative to the project's scope and your track record. Frankly, Bobby, you could get better terms elsewhere. The question is, why give First Liberty another chance?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Bobby, who took a moment before responding. "My great-grandfather banked here when it was still Millfield Savings and Loan," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard, not just listened to. "Every generation of Caldwells has walked through those doors out there. We've had good years and bad ones, seen managers come and go, watched policies change with the seasons." He looked directly at Pemberton. "What happened yesterday wasn't personal. It's happened before, in this bank and others. People see what they expect to see. Farmer walks in looking like me, you think small loan, probably behind on payments, maybe losing the farm to development." Pemberton's face reddened, but he maintained eye contact. "But here's what I know," Bobby continued. "This community needs examples. It needs to see that innovation doesn't always wear a suit, that success doesn't always speak with a Harvard accent. If we do this deal, it won't just be about building a distribution center. It'll be about showing every young person in Millfield that there's more than one path to success." Udi, he pulled out his worn folder, the same one from yesterday, and extracted a document. "This is a proposal for something beyond the distribution center. I want to establish a fund administered by First Liberty to provide microloans to young farmers and agricultural entrepreneurs. People who have ideas but not collateral, vision but not venture capital." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. This wasn't in any of the documents she'd reviewed. "The fund would be seeded with 5% of Caldwell Acres' annual profits," Bobby explained. "But here's the key. Loan decisions wouldn't be based solely on traditional metrics. We'd look at innovation potential, community impact, sustainable practices. And the evaluation committee would include people who understand farming, not just finance." He slid the document across the table. "Yesterday's misunderstanding could become tomorrow's opportunity. We can show that banks and farmers aren't adversaries, they're partners in building stronger communities." Victoria picked up the document, scanning it quickly before passing it to her colleagues. The room hummed with sudden energy as the executives leaned in, their tablets forgotten, as they focused on Bobby's handwritten proposal. "This is ambitious," James Miller said, respect evident in his voice. "You're essentially proposing a new model for agricultural lending." "The old model is broken," Bobby replied simply. "It sees farming as a static industry, evaluates Farmers like their factory workers punching a clock, but modern agriculture is about innovation, technology, environmental stewardship. We need financial institutions that understand that. Patricia Gonzalez was already making notes. The impact metrics you're suggesting, soil health improvements, water conservation, community employment, these align perfectly with emerging ESG standards. This could position First Liberty as a leader in sustainable agricultural finance. Victoria set down the document and looked at Bobby with new appreciation. You came here yesterday for a loan, faced dismissal, and returned today with a vision for transforming rural banking. Is this how you always handle setbacks? A slight smile crossed Bobby's weathered face. My wife used to say that manure makes the best fertilizer. Sometimes the worst experiences grow the best ideas. The reference to Sarah was subtle but deliberate. Bobby had learned that personal truth, shared sparingly, could humanize business discussions in powerful ways. Mr. Pemberton, Victoria said, turning to the branch manager, you've been notably quiet. What are your thoughts? Pemberton straightened in his chair, clearly struggling with the moment. I owe Mr. Caldwell, Bobby, an apology. Not just for yesterday, but for failing to see what should have been obvious. He paused, gathering courage. I've spent my career believing I could assess creditworthiness at a glance. Yesterday proved how wrong that assumption is. He turned to Bobby directly. Your proposal for the microloan fund, I'd like to volunteer to help develop the evaluation criteria. I need to learn how to see potential, not just polish. The admission hung in the air, vulnerable and honest. Bobby nodded slowly, recognizing the courage it took for Pemberton to acknowledge his error publicly. Growth comes from discomfort, Bobby said, for farms and for people. I accept your offer. Harold. The use of Pemberton's first name was deliberate, a bridge built across yesterday's chasm. Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her professional demeanor. It seems we're not just approving a loan today, we're forming a partnership. She looked around the table. Are we in agreement? The executives nodded, their enthusiasm palpable, but Victoria held up a hand. Before we finalize anything, there's something else. She pressed another button on the remote, and the screens displayed a press release draft. Bobby, we'd like your permission to share this story. Not just the loan approval, but the lessons learned. Other financial institutions need to hear this message. Bobby studied the draft, noting how it balanced honesty about the initial, failure with optimism about the new partnership. On one condition, he said finally, include a line about how my appearance hasn't changed. Same boots, same truck, same person, different perception. Done, Victoria agreed immediately. Now, let's talk terms. The next hour was spent in detailed discussion of loan structures, interest rates, and timelines. But unlike typical negotiations, the atmosphere was collaborative rather than adversarial. Ideas flowed freely, with Bobby's practical insights merging seamlessly with the executive's financial expertise. When they broke for coffee, Emily Torres wheeled in a cart with refreshments. As she served, Bobby noticed her listening intently to the conversations around her. Emily, he said, causing her to start slightly. Your grandmother once told me that the best gardens grow when young plants learn from old roots. What do you think about our micro-loan fund idea? Emily's eyes widened at being directly addressed in such a high-level meeting. She glanced at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. I think it's exactly what Millfield needs, Emily said, her voice gaining confidence. I have friends with agricultural degrees who can't get traditional loans to start innovative projects. They have apps for crop monitoring, ideas for vertical farming, plans for agritourism, but banks see their age and lack of collateral and say no. Nah, would you be interested in joining our evaluation committee? Bobby asked. We need perspectives from your generation. Emily nearly dropped the coffee pot. Yes, absolutely. Victoria smiled approvingly. Consider it done. Emily will represent the emerging generation on the committee. Undoubtedly, as the meeting resumed, the energy in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a loan application had evolved into a collaborative vision for community transformation. Harold Pemberton, particularly, seemed energized by the opportunity for redemption and growth. By noon, the basic agreements were in place. The loan for the distribution center was approved at favorable terms, and the framework for the microloan fund was established. But more importantly, relationships had been forged that would impact Millfield for generations. As the meeting concluded, Victoria walked Bobby to the door. "You know," she said quietly, "I flew here expecting to simply apologize and approve a loan. Instead, I'm leaving with a new model for rural banking and a reminder about the dangers of preconceptions." "Change starts with single moments," Bobby replied. "Yesterday's moment led to today's possibility." "There's one more thing," Victoria said, reaching into her briefcase. She pulled out a small box and handed it to Bobby. "Open it." Inside was a pair of golden cufflinks shaped like wheat stalks. "My grandfather was a rice farmer in China," Victoria explained. "He always said the most important people in any society are those who feed it." These were his. Bobby touched the cufflinks gently. "I'm honored, but I don't really have occasion to wear these." "Keep them anyway," Victoria smiled. "Sometimes we need reminders that agriculture and high finance aren't different worlds, just different expressions of growth." As Bobby walked back through the bank, he noticed several things had already changed. His photograph now hung on the wall of notable clients, right between the mayor and the president of the regional hospital. Emily was showing the morning's agreement to other young employees, their excitement visible. Marcus stood a little taller at his post, having witnessed history being made. Outside, Millfield's main street bustled with lunch hour activity. Word had somehow already spread. Small towns had their own efficient communication networks. Several people waved as Bobby walked to his truck, and old Dan Fletcher from the hardware store actually jogged across the street to shake his hand. "Heard about the distribution center, Bobby? That'll mean jobs for our kids. Maybe keep them from moving to the cities." "That's the idea, Dan. Opportunities should grow where people have roots." As Bobby drove back to the farm, his ancient truck rumbling faithfully along familiar roads, he reflected on the last 24 hours. The distribution center would rise on the old Morrison property, bringing new life to fallow land. The Titus microloan fund would water seeds of innovation throughout the region. And perhaps most importantly, perspectives had shifted. Not just about him, but about the potential that existed in every overlooked person and idea. His phone buzzed with messages. Architects ready to finalize plans. Contractors eager to bid. The university proposing an expanded partnership. Each notification represented movement, growth, possibility. But one message stood out. It was from Harold Pemberton. "Thank you for the second chance. I've spent the lunch hour researching agricultural innovation. Had no idea how much I didn't know. Looking forward to learning." Bobby smiled, remembering Sarah's words about making something that matters. Sometimes what mattered most wasn't the size of the achievement, but the ripples it created. Today's ripples would become tomorrow's waves, washing away old prejudices and revealing new possibilities. As he turned into the long driveway of Caldwell, acres, the afternoon sun illuminated the fields stretching toward the horizon. The same view his ancestors had seen, but transformed by innovation and perseverance. The old barn still stood, a monument to tradition, while the Agricultural Innovation Center gleamed with promise for the future. He parked the truck and walked toward his office, where plans awaited finalization and calls needed returning. But first, he had one more task. Sitting at his desk, Bobby pulled out stationery and began writing a letter by hand, as was his habit for important correspondence. "Dear Victoria," he wrote, "thank you for seeing what others missed and for having the courage to acknowledge. When systems need changing, the cufflinks will be treasured, not as jewelry, but as a reminder that bridges can be built from any material, even golden wheat." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "What we started today goes beyond banking or farming. It's about recognizing that innovation often comes dressed in work clothes, that wisdom speaks with many accents, and that the most profound changes begin when we challenge our own assumptions." The letter continued, outlining his vision for the partnership and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to transform a moment of prejudice into a movement for progress. As he wrote, the afternoon sun slanted through his office window, casting long shadows across decades of photographs, awards, and memorabilia that told the story of Caldwell Acres. But Bobby's eyes were fixed on the future, on the distribution center that would rise from empty fields, on the young farmers who would receive their first loans, on the jobs that would keep families in Millfield. Most of all, he thought about the barriers that had fallen today, not just for him, but for everyone who would follow. The letter concluded with a simple truth. Sometimes the most important doors we open are the ones in our own minds. As evening approached, Bobby sealed the envelope and prepared for the flood of activity that would come with turning vision into reality. The ancient truck waited faithfully in the yard, ready for another day of defying expectations. The fields whispered with autumn wind, carrying seeds of change across the heartland. And somewhere, Bobby knew, Sarah was smiling. The winter sun had barely crested the horizon when Bobby Caldwell woke to an unfamiliar sound, his phone ringing with a Chicago area code. Few people called this early, especially from the city. He answered, voice still rough with sleep. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Diana Mitchell, executive producer with Heartland Business Journal. We understand you've recently secured financing for a significant agricultural expansion project with First Liberty Bank. We'd like to feature your story in our upcoming special on rural innovation." Bobby sat up in bed, processing the request. Word was traveling faster than he'd anticipated. The deal with Victoria Chen had been finalized only yesterday afternoon, yet somehow news had already reached national business media. "I appreciate the interest, Ms. Mitchell, but I'm just a farmer doing what farmers have always done, adapting to changing conditions." The producer's laugh was gentle but persistent. "Mr. Caldwell, that's exactly the perspective we're seeking. Your transformation of traditional farming into a modern agribusiness while maintaining your roots is precisely the narrative our viewers need to hear." Bobby gazed out his bedroom window at the fields stretching toward the horizon, land that had supported 5 generations of Caldwells through drought, flood, market crashes, and technological revolutions. There was wisdom in those acres that most business programs never captured. "How about this?" he countered. "If you want my story, you need to tell the complete one. Not just about me, but about the community that's made it possible. The young bank teller who saw potential where her boss saw only mud on boots. The security guard who showed respect regardless of appearance. The farm workers who've implemented innovations that textbooks are only beginning to recognize." There was a brief silence on the line, then, "That sounds even better than what we had planned. When can we send a crew to Millfield?" That conversation had been 3 weeks ago. Now, on a brisk December morning, Bobby stood at the edge of his largest wheat field as the production team set up for the final interview segment. The feature had expanded from a 10-minute business profile to a full-hour documentary on agricultural innovation and the changing dynamics of rural finance. Today's filming would complete nearly a month of recordings, drone footage, and interviews throughout Millfield. Diana Mitchell approached, clipboard in hand. Unlike most television producers Bobby had encountered, she'd shown genuine interest in understanding the complexities of modern agriculture, often staying hours after filming to walk the fields and ask questions about soil composition, water management, and crop rotation strategies. "Ready for the final push?" she asked, handing him a steaming cup of coffee she'd brought from the catering table. "After today, we'll leave you in peace." Bobby smiled, accepting the cup gratefully. The early winter morning carried a biting chill that penetrated his work coat. "Peace is overrated. Change requires a little disruption now and then." Diana laughed, having come to appreciate Bobby's practical philosophy. Speaking of disruption, Victoria Chen just arrived. She flew in specifically for this segment. Bobby turned to see a sleek black SUV navigating the dirt access road that led to their filming location. Victoria had become a regular visitor to Millfield since their initial meeting, her interest extending beyond the specifics of their loan agreement to the broader implications of the partnership they'd established. "Harold's already here," Diana continued, gesturing toward the command tent where Harold Pemberton sat reviewing documents, his transformation from reluctant banker to advocate still evolving. "Emily will join us after her morning shift, and we've arranged for several of the Innovation Fund applicants to participate in the final roundtable discussion." The scale of what had developed from his initial bank visit sometimes caught Bobby by surprise. What had begun as a routine loan application had catalyzed a fundamental shift in how First Liberty, and increasingly other regional banks, approached agricultural lending. The Microloan Innovation Fund had already approved financing for 7 projects, each representing a different facet of rural entrepreneurship that traditional banking metrics would have overlooked. As Victoria emerged from the SUV, Bobby was struck again by the contrast between her metropolitan polish and his weathered pragmatism. Yet over the past weeks, they'd developed a genuine rapport based on shared values that transcended superficial differences. She'd come to understand the sophistication behind his practical exterior, while he'd recognized the humanity beneath her corporate persona. "Bobby," she called, navigating carefully across the uneven ground in shoes clearly not designed for farm visits. "The Chicago Tribune is running a feature on our partnership next week. Their business editor wants to position it as a model for rural economic development. As long as they understand the model only works when both sides recognize value beyond traditional metrics," Bobby replied, helping her across a particularly muddy section of ground. "It's not just about banks lowering barriers. It's about appreciating that innovation doesn't always wear a suit." Victoria nodded, having heard variations of this theme often enough to appreciate its significance. That's precisely what makes this story compelling. It challenges assumptions on both sides. The film crew was nearly ready. Camera equipment, arranged to capture the early morning light slanting across fields that had sustained generations. The director, a bearded man named Russell with unexpected agricultural roots in Nebraska, approached with final instructions. "We'll start with you and Victoria discussing the initial meeting, then bring Harold in to talk about his perspective on what he missed during your first visit. Then we'll transition to the Innovation Center for the roundtable with fund applicants. Simple, authentic conversations, no need for rehearsed answers." Bobby nodded, appreciating Russell's straightforward approach. Throughout the filming process, the director had shown genuine respect for farmers' practical wisdom, never treating them as rustic curiosities for urban consumption. As they took their positions for the interview, Bobby noticed Emily Torres, arriving, still in her bank uniform, but with a new confidence in her bearing. She'd recently been promoted to Community Outreach Coordinator for the Innovation Fund, her understanding of both banking protocols and local needs, making her uniquely qualified to bridge institutional requirements with agricultural realities. "Before we start," Bobby said quietly to Victoria as microphones were being adjusted. "I want to thank you again for seeing beyond first impressions. Not everyone in your position would have reconsidered a decision once it was made." Victoria's expression softened. "Actually, I've been meaning to tell you something about that. The truth is, my grandfather was a lot like you. He immigrated to California with nothing but farming knowledge from the old country, built a successful orchard operation that now supplies half the organic apples in the Northwest. But he never dressed the part of a successful businessman. Banks constantly underestimated him, even when he was worth millions." She glanced around to ensure they weren't being recorded yet. "When I heard about what happened with your loan application, I didn't just see a business opportunity we'd missed. I saw my grandfather all over again. Wisdom and capability hidden behind practical appearances that bankers are trained to dismiss." The revelation added another dimension to Victoria's swift intervention, explaining the personal conviction behind her professional response. Before Bobby could reply, Russell called for quiet and the cameras began rolling. "We're here with Bobby Caldwell, whose innovative approach to agriculture has transformed not just farming practices, but potentially the relationship between rural businesses and financial institutions," Diana began, her tone conversational rather than scripted. "Bobby, take us back to that first meeting at First Liberty Bank. What were you expecting when you walked in?" Bobby considered the question, his weathered hands resting comfortably on the fence post beside him. "I expected what I've always experienced. Initial skepticism based on appearance, followed by gradual recognition of substance. What made this encounter different wasn't the initial judgment. That's happened throughout my career. What made it different was Victoria's willingness to challenge institutional assumptions and Harold's courage to acknowledge his mistake." The interview flowed naturally as they recounted the events that had led to their current partnership. The dismissal, the reconsideration, the transformation of a loan application into a model for community development. Harold joined midway, his perspective on the experience revealing both professional humility and genuine growth. "I've spent 20 years in banking," Harold admitted, winter sunlight accentuating the gray at his temples. "I was trained to evaluate worth based on appearance, credentials, and traditional metrics. What I failed to recognize was that innovation often exists outside those parameters. Bobby taught me that capability doesn't always look like we expect it to." As the morning progressed, the conversation deepened, exploring not just the specifics of Bobby's agricultural innovations, but the broader implications for rural communities facing economic challenges. The backdrop of active farm operations, workers harvesting late-season crops, machinery moving efficiently between fields, provided visual testimony to the sophisticated enterprise behind Bobby's unassuming exterior. When they broke for lunch, Emily approached Bobby with news that epitomized the ongoing impact of their partnership. "The Wilkins brothers just submitted an application to the Innovation Fund," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "They've developed a sustainable packaging material made from agricultural waste. Their prototype reduces plastic use by 80% while providing better temperature control for fresh produce." Tom Wilkins in high school was always tinkering with things, Bobby recalled, helping himself to coffee from the catering table. Their father thought they were wasting time that could be spent on traditional farm work. Now they might revolutionize how we package and ship produce. Victoria joined them, having overheard the conversation. That's exactly the kind of innovation traditional lending overlooks. From a conventional banking perspective, too young. Men without business degrees experimenting with agricultural waste would never qualify for funding, regardless of the potential market impact. Which is precisely why we needed a different evaluation model. Bobby agreed. The Innovation Fund doesn't just look at credit scores and collateral, it assesses potential impact, sustainability, and community benefit. As they prepared to transition to the Agricultural Innovation Center for the afternoon's filming, Bobby noticed Harold engaged in animated conversation with several farm workers near the equipment shed. The banker's transformation from dismissive skeptic to engaged advocate continued to unfold in small moments like these, genuine curiosity replacing professional detachment. The drive to the Innovation Center took them past fields in various stages of harvesting and preparation. Diana rode with Bobby in his weathered truck, using the opportunity to ask questions away from cameras and microphones. "Something I've been curious about," she said, as they navigated a particularly bumpy section of road. "You could easily afford a new truck. The financial documents I've reviewed show Caldwell Agricultural Innovations is valued at over $50 million. Yet you still drive this. This 1994 Chevy has transported me through every phase of building this operation," Bobby replied, patting the dashboard affectionately. "It reminds me of where we started and how far we've come. More importantly, it reminds others that success doesn't always look like luxury brands and status symbols." Diana nodded, making notes on her ever-present tablet. "That seems to be a recurring theme in your approach, challenging visual expectations of success. Is that deliberate?" Bobby considered the question as they turned onto the main highway, leading toward the Innovation Center. The contrast between his modest truck and the sleek production vehicles following them underscored the point under discussion. "Not initially," he admitted. "In the beginning, I was just focused on survival after Sarah died. Then, on innovation as a pathway to profitability. The awareness of how appearance affected others' perceptions came gradually, through hundreds of encounters where I was underestimated based on what people saw rather than what I knew." He slowed the truck to allow a tractor to enter the roadway ahead of them. "Eventually, I realized that maintaining this appearance wasn't just about personal comfort or nostalgia, it became a filtering mechanism. People who can see beyond. Surface impressions to recognize capability are the ones I want to work with. Those who can't usually reveal themselves within minutes of meeting me." Upon arriving at the Agricultural Innovation Center, they found the afternoon's participants already gathered. The center itself represented Bobby's vision brought to physical form, traditional agricultural architecture housing cutting-edge technology, with educational spaces where seasoned farmers shared wisdom with student interns from 3 states. The roundtable discussion was set in the main research hall, surrounded by projects in various stages of development. Vertical farming systems stretched toward the high ceiling, while computerized irrigation models demonstrated water conservation. Techniques developed through Caldwell's research partnerships with regional universities. The participants represented the diverse face of modern agricultural innovation. Jeremy and Michael Wilkins, with their sustainable packaging samples. Maria Dominguez, whose drone-based crop monitoring system was revolutionizing precision agriculture. Dr. Amara Campbell from Iowa State's Agricultural Technology Department. And most surprisingly, Marcus Williams, the security guard from First Liberty Bank who'd shown Bobby respect when others hadn't. We invited Marcus to participate because his story illuminates another aspect of recognition and potential, Diana explained as the crew arranged lighting for the roundtable. He has an engineering degree that he couldn't use because of a minor criminal record from his youth. The Innovation Fund just approved his application for technology that improves livestock environment monitoring. The revelation added yet another layer to the unfolding narrative of potential recognized beyond traditional metrics. As Bobby took his seat at the table, He was struck by how the story had expanded beyond his personal experience to encompass a community of innovators who shared common experiences of being underestimated or overlooked. Russell called for quiet, and the cameras began rolling on what would become the documentary's emotional centerpiece, a frank discussion about barriers to innovation and the transformative impact of having potential recognized and supported. The hardest part wasn't developing the technology, Maria Dominguez explained, describing her journey to creating agricultural drone systems. It was getting anyone to take me seriously as a 24-year-old woman talking about precision. Agriculture to male bankers 3 times my age. They kept asking to speak with my father or husband. Michael Wilkins nodded in recognition. We heard stick to farming so many times from traditional lenders, as if developing biodegradable packaging from crop waste wasn't farming. It was literally finding additional value in what we already produced. Earthy, the conversation flowed naturally between specific innovations and the broader issues of access, recognition, and support. Dr. Campbell provided academic perspective on institutional barriers to agricultural innovation, while Marcus spoke powerfully about how criminal justice records created permanent obstacles regardless of rehabilitation or expertise. Victoria and Harold contributed insights from the financial sector, acknowledging systemic biases while outlining the changes being implemented at First Liberty and beyond. Emily described her new role bridging traditional banking metrics with innovation potential assessment. Throughout the discussion, Bobby served more as facilitator than focus, guiding the conversation toward constructive recognition of both challenges and opportunities. His genuine respect for each participant's expertise created space for authentic exchange rather than performative optimism for the cameras. As afternoon light slanted through the center's windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above experimental growing beds, the conversation turned toward broader implications for rural communities facing economic and demographic challenges. This isn't just about individual success stories, Bobby noted, gesturing toward the active projects surrounding them. It's about creating sustainable economic ecosystems that give young people reasons to stay in rural communities, that recognize the value of agricultural knowledge while embracing technological evolution. The documentary team captured not just the roundtable discussion, but the living laboratory surrounding it. Interns working alongside experienced farmers, technological innovations emerging from traditional agricultural knowledge, the dynamic intersection of preservation and progression that characterized Caldwell's approach. When filming concluded for the day, the group remained, conversations continuing long after cameras stopped rolling. The Innovation Center's cafeteria provided dinner from locally sourced ingredients, many grown in the center's experimental fields. The production team mingled with fund applicants and farm workers, boundaries dissolving as stories were shared without the mediation of lenses and microphones. Bobby found himself sitting with Victoria and Marcus, watching the natural networking unfold across the room. "This is what success really looks like," he observed quietly. "Not just profitable operations or funded projects, but connections forming between people who might never have encountered each other otherwise." Victoria nodded, observing Emily deep in conversation with the Wilkins brothers about potential applications for their packaging technology. When we remove artificial barriers, unexpected collaborations emerge. The banker learning from the farmer, the engineer finding applications for academic research, the student offering fresh perspective on traditional methods. "I've been thinking about my grandfather," Marcus said unexpectedly, turning the sustainable packaging sample in his hands. He had innovations too, developed an irrigation system from scrap parts that outperformed anything commercially available in the 1970s. but it died with him because no one with influence ever saw it in operation. The observation hung in the air, a sobering reminder of countless innovations lost to dismissal and lack of support. Bobby thought about how easily his own journey might have followed a similar path, if not for key moments of recognition and opportunity. "That's why documentation matters," he replied finally. "Not just for patents or profits, but to preserve wisdom that emerges from practical experience. Agricultural knowledge has always developed through observation and adaptation, but too often those insights disappeared when the innovators did." Victoria's phone chimed with a message that drew her attention momentarily. Speaking of documentation, the Chicago Tribune piece is scheduled for this Sunday. Their business editor wants one final quote from you, Bobby. "Tell him innovation doesn't wear a uniform," Bobby replied without hesitation. "It doesn't have a degree requirement or a dress code. It appears wherever necessity meets creativity, whether that's in corporate labs or farm workshops. Our job isn't to define where innovation can emerge, but to recognize it wherever it appears." The evening concluded with an impromptu tour of ongoing projects, Bobby leading Victoria, Diana, and other interested participants through greenhouse spaces where traditional crops were being cultivated through methods that married ancient wisdom with technological precision. "Tomatoes are fascinating examples of agricultural evolution," he explained, showing them an experimental variety being developed to thrive with minimal water. The wild ancestors produced fruit the size of berries. Generations of selective cultivation created what we now recognize as tomatoes, each variety developed for specific conditions and purposes. He gestured toward plants growing in carefully monitored soil compositions. "What we're doing isn't fundamentally different from what farmers have always done, responding to challenges, preserving what works, adapting what doesn't. The tools have changed, but the essential process remains: observation, experimentation, adaptation." Diana captured this impromptu lecture on her phone, recognizing content too valuable to miss. "You should teach, Bobby. This perspective on agricultural innovation as a continuum rather than a disruption needs wider audience." "I do teach," he replied, indicating student interns working nearby. "Just not in conventional classrooms. Some knowledge transfers better through demonstration than lecture, through participation rather than observation." As the evening wound down and visitors began departing, Bobby found himself standing with Harold near the center's entrance, watching taillights disappear down the long driveway toward town. The banker had remained quieter than usual throughout the afternoon, observing more than participating. "Something on your mind, Harold?" Bobby asked as they stood in the chill December air. Harold nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been banking in rural communities for 20 years, thinking I understood agricultural economics. Today, I realized how little I actually comprehended about the innovation happening right under my nose." He gestured toward the Innovation Center, its windows glowing with activity, even as evening deepened. "How many opportunities have I missed? How many Harold Pembertons are sitting behind desks right now, turning down the next Bobby Caldwell because they can't see past work boots and weathered hands?" The question wasn't rhetorical, and Bobby recognized the genuine soul-searching behind it. The important thing isn't how many opportunities were missed yesterday, but how many will be recognized tomorrow. Systems change one decision at a time, one person at a time. "That's why I've requested a transfer to Chicago," Harold said unexpectedly. "Victoria's creating a new division focused on agricultural innovation lending. She's asked me to help develop training that addresses exactly these blind spots in how we evaluate rural businesses." The announcement surprised Bobby. Despite Harold's evolution, he'd always seemed quintessentially small town in his orientation. "You're leaving Millfield?" 3 days a week in Chicago, 2 here. Harold clarified. Emily will be managing local operations with expanded authority. The Innovation Fund needs connections to larger capital pools while maintaining roots in rural realities. I'll be the bridge. The development represented yet another unforeseen ripple effect from their initial encounter. What had begun as a simple loan application continued generating unexpected transformations, creating new pathways for both individuals and institutions. Well, Bobby said after a moment, extending his hand, I'll miss sparring with you across the desk, but it sounds like you'll be doing important work. Harold shook his hand firmly, his grip conveying respect that had been earned rather than granted. Thanks to you, I now understand that banking isn't just about managing risk. It's about recognizing potential in all its forms. That's a lesson worth sharing beyond Millfield. After Harold departed, Bobby remained outside, watching stars emerge above fields that had sustained his family through 5 generations of challenges and changes. Tomorrow would bring the final day of filming, focusing on the future rather than the past. But tonight offered rare moments of reflection. His phone rang, breaking the evening stillness. The display showed Tom Henderson's number, his neighbor to the north and oldest friend. Bobby, you'd better come over. Someone's here you need to meet. The cryptic message was typical of Tom, who preferred direct action to lengthy explanation. On my way, Bobby replied, heading toward his truck. Tom's farm adjoined Caldwell's northern boundary, their family's histories intertwined through decades of cooperation, competition, and mutual support. Unlike Bobby, Tom had maintained traditional farming methods, skeptical of innovations that promised more than they delivered. Their friendly disagreements had sparked countless discussions that pushed Bobby to ensure his modernizations maintained agricultural integrity rather than just chasing technological novelty. Arriving at the Henderson farmhouse 15 minutes later, Bobby found Tom waiting on the porch, a bemused expression on his weathered face. She showed up about an hour ago, he said without preamble. Says she's from California. Been following your innovations in agricultural distribution. Drove straight here from the airport. She? Bobby questioned, following Tom inside. In the Henderson living room, a young woman sat surrounded by notes and a laptop displaying data charts. She rose as they entered, mid-20s with practical clothes that suggested familiarity with actual field work rather than just agricultural theory. Mr. Caldwell, she began without preamble. I'm Sophia Reyes from Caltech's Sustainable Agriculture Department. I've been studying your cold chain innovations for my doctoral dissertation on renewable energy applications in agricultural distribution. Bobby shook her offered hand, noting calluses that spoke of hands-on research rather than purely academic study. You drove straight to Tom's farm rather than contacting our main office, she smiled, revealing the pragmatism behind her approach. Your office has been fielding media inquiries and investment proposals for weeks. I needed unfiltered conversation about practical applications, not corporate positioning. Mr. Henderson here was mentioned in several research papers as your constant challenger. I figured he'd have perspectives you might not include in official documentation. The directness of her approach and the insight behind it impressed Bobby immediately. She'd recognized that innovation emerges through dialogue between tradition and progression, and had sought out both voices rather than just the more publicized success story. Tom chuckled, clearly enjoying his role as the voice of agricultural skepticism. Been telling her how your fancy temperature monitoring failed during the 2019 harvest, and we had to go back to old-school methods for a week, which ultimately led to the redundant systems we developed afterward, Bobby acknowledged. Failure often teaches more than success. For the next 2 hours, the three engaged in detailed discussion about agricultural innovation, its promises, limitations, and necessary grounding in practical farming wisdom. Sophia's questions revealed genuine understanding of both technological potential and agricultural realities, her dissertation focusing on the intersection between traditional knowledge and modern applications. The problem with most agricultural technology development, she explained, illustrating her point with examples from failed initiatives, is that it emerges from engineers who've never experienced actual growing seasons, who don't understand the practical constraints of implementation in field conditions. Bobby nodded, having encountered similar disconnects throughout his career. That's why our Innovation Center pairs engineering students with experienced farmers. Theory needs practice to become useful. Practice needs theory to evolve beyond tradition. As their conversation continued, Bobby recognized in Sophia a kindred approach to agricultural development, one that respected traditional wisdom while embracing technological potential that sought sustainability alongside profitability. Her research paralleled his practical journey, approaching similar conclusions from an academic direction. When she finally gathered her notes to leave, promising to return for more structured interviews later in the week, Bobby found himself offering unexpected access. Come by the Innovation Center tomorrow afternoon. We're completing the documentary filming, but afterward I can show you some projects still in development stages, things we haven't documented publicly yet. The invitation represented unusual openness from a man who typically guarded innovations carefully until fully developed. But something in Sophia's integrated approach to agricultural development resonated with his own journey, suggesting potential collaboration beyond academic documentation. After she departed, Tom regarded Bobby with knowing amusement. "Reminds me of Sarah," he observed, referring to Bobby's late wife. "Same way of cutting straight to the heart of things, same refusal to accept false choices between tradition and innovation." The comparison, though unexpected, carried truth that Bobby couldn't deny. Sarah had possessed similar clarity about agricultural development, understanding that meaningful innovation preserved essential wisdom while transcending unnecessary limitations. "She's doing important work," Bobby replied simply. "Documenting approaches that bridge divides between academic research and practical implementation. That's knowledge worth supporting." Driving home through darkness, broken only by occasional farmhouse lights, Bobby reflected on the day's unexpected developments, from Harold's new position bridging rural and urban banking perspectives to Sophia's arrival representing academic recognition of practical innovation. The ripples from his confrontation with institutional dismissal continued expanding in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Morning arrived with heavy fog blanketing the fields, creating an otherworldly landscape for the documentary's final day of filming. Bobby had been awake since 4:30, reviewing the Innovation Center's latest soil analysis results and corresponding with partners about upcoming distribution contracts. By the time Diana and her crew arrived at 7, he'd already completed a half-day's administrative work. "Perfect conditions," Russell commented, surveying the fog-shrouded landscape, visually symbolic for discussions about future possibilities emerging from present foundations. Today's filming would focus primarily on future directions for Caldwell Agricultural Innovations, for the partnership with First Liberty Bank, for rural innovation more broadly. The setting had been arranged in the Innovation Center's demonstration field, where experimental crops grew alongside traditional varieties, embodying the dialogue between heritage and development that characterized Bobby's approach. Victoria arrived with Emily and Harold, their informal conversation suggesting deepening professional rapport. Additional participants joined gradually, representatives from the universities partnering with the Innovation Center, young farmers, whose projects had received funding, community leaders witnessing Millfield's economic revitalization. As microphones were adjusted and final camera positions established, Diana outlined the morning's objectives. "We want to capture authentic conversation about rural futures, economic sustainability, technological integration, community development. No scripted responses, just genuine dialogue about challenges and opportunities facing agricultural communities." The resulting discussions, filmed as morning fog gradually yielded to winter sunshine, captured perspectives ranging from cautious optimism to transformative vision. Bobby's role remained more facilitator than focus, drawing out diverse viewpoints while contextualizing technological innovations within broader community needs. "Precision agriculture isn't just about efficiency," he noted during one segment, referencing drone-based monitoring systems being developed through Innovation Fund support. "It's about creating specialized agricultural roles that give young people professional pathways to remain in rural communities. The drone technician monitoring crop moisture levels has a skilled position, requiring both technological expertise and agricultural understanding, knowledge that becomes more valuable when grounded in community context." Victoria contributed financial perspective, describing how banking metrics were evolving to recognize value in agricultural innovations that traditional evaluation models overlooked. "We're developing new assessment frameworks that consider sustainability impacts, community benefits, and long-term resource management alongside conventional profit metrics." Emily spoke about her experiences bridging institutional procedures with community needs, her promotion representing both personal advancement and systemic change. "Banking doesn't have to choose between rigorous evaluation and inclusive recognition. We're learning to see potential through multiple lenses." Throughout the morning, the documentary captured not just verbal reflections, but practical demonstrations. Innovative irrigation systems in operation, soil monitoring technology providing real-time analysis, distribution logistics coordinated through integrated software developed specifically for agricultural applications. During a filming break, Bobby noticed Sophia Reyes observing from the edge of the demonstration field, her academic's eye analyzing both the agricultural innovations and the documentary process capturing them. He waved her over, making introductions that integrated her academic perspective into the ongoing documentation. Dr. Reyes is conducting important research on knowledge transfer between traditional agricultural wisdom and technological innovation, he explained to Diana. Her dissertation examines how effective innovations preserve essential practices while transcending unnecessary limitations. Diana immediately recognized valuable additional perspective, inviting Sophia to participate in the afternoon's planned discussions about agricultural education and knowledge preservation. The young academic's insights added depth to conversations about bridging theoretical research and practical implementation, academic credentials, and experiential wisdom. As filming progressed through demonstrations of innovations at various development stages, Bobby found himself increasingly reflective about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Each project represented not just technological advancement, but relationships built, barriers overcome, possibilities recognized beyond conventional limitations. The cold chain logistics system that had revolutionized regional produce distribution had emerged from conversations with restaurant chefs frustrated by quality degradation during transport. The soil monitoring technology currently being refined had developed through collaboration between university researchers and experienced farmers whose generational knowledge provided contextual understanding no laboratory could replicate. During the lunch break, Bobby noticed Harold engaged in earnest conversation with Sophia, the banker, learning about alternative evaluation metrics for agricultural innovation from academic perspective. The interaction epitomized the cross-disciplinary exchange Bobby had long advocated: financial expertise, academic research, and practical agricultural knowledge, informing each other rather than operating in isolated spheres. The afternoon's filming shifted to the Innovation Center's educational spaces, where interns from 3 states gained hands-on experience with both traditional farming methods and technological applications. The documentary captured the intergenerational knowledge transfer occurring daily. Experienced farmers sharing wisdom accumulated through seasons of practical observation. Young innovators contributing technological fluency their elders sometimes lacked. This is where meaningful agricultural development actually happens, Bobby explained, as cameras recorded students calibrating irrigation systems under a veteran farmer's guidance. Not in isolated laboratories or corporate boardrooms, but in spaces where traditional knowledge and technological potential inform each other continuously. The day's final segment gathered all participants in the Innovation Center's main hall for concluding reflections. The space itself embodied the integration Bobby had cultivated throughout his career. Traditional timber framing housing cutting edge, equipment, historical agricultural implements displayed alongside prototype technologies, the architectural embodiment of evolution rather than revolution. What began with a banker's dismissal has evolved into a model for rural economic development, Diana summarized, guiding the conversation toward concluding insights. What lessons should other communities and institutions take from this experience? The resulting discussion transcended the specific circumstances that had initiated their journey, addressing broader questions of recognition, potential, and the artificial limitations imposed by institutional assumptions. Harold spoke with particular clarity about banking's responsibility to develop evaluation models that recognized innovation in all its forms. We've been trained to assess worth through standardized metrics that inherently privilege certain backgrounds, appearances, and credentials, he acknowledged. True innovation in rural finance requires developing assessment frameworks that recognize potential beyond conventional parameters. Victoria described institutional changes already being implemented across Midwest financial groups' regional branches, training programs addressing unconscious bias, revised evaluation criteria for agricultural lending, community advisory boards, providing contextual insight for loan decisions. Emily offered perspective as a young professional navigating institutional transformation, while university partners discussed academic recognition of knowledge developed through practical experience. Rather than formal research, community leaders addressed broader economic implications for rural sustainability and development. Throughout these reflections, Bobby remained characteristically focused on practical applications rather than philosophical abstractions. What matters isn't just acknowledging past limitations, he noted, but creating systems that recognize potential in its many forms going forward. The next innovation might come from a 19-year-old intern or a 70-year-old farmer. Our responsibility is building institutions capable of recognizing value regardless of its packaging. As filming concluded and equipment was packed away, the documentary team gathered for final acknowledgements. What had begun as a straightforward business feature had evolved into a comprehensive exploration of rural innovation, institutional transformation, and the recognition of potential beyond conventional parameters. This story deserves wider audience than our standard programming, Diana commented as they prepared to depart. We're discussing festival submissions and extended distribution. The implications go far beyond agricultural financing or rural banking. Bobby nodded, understanding that their experience had illuminated patterns relevant to many fields where institutional assumptions limited recognition of unconventional innovation. Just make sure the focus remains on the principles rather than personalities. This isn't about individual success as much as systemic recognition. As documentary vehicles departed down the long driveway leading toward town, Bobby remained at the Innovation Center with Sophia, Victoria, and several university partners. The formal documentation had concluded, but their collaborative work continued. Practical implementation of principles featured in the documentary. "I've been thinking about your cold chain distribution system," Sophia said, as they walked through experimental greenhouse spaces. "Have you considered integrated solar applications to maintain temperature control during transport? My research suggests significant efficiency improvements compared to conventional refrigeration." The question launched detailed technical discussion that continued through afternoon and into evening. Victoria contributing financial perspective on implementation costs and university partners offering research support for prototype development. The collaboration embodied the integrated approach to agricultural innovation that characterized Caldwell's success: practical wisdom, academic research, and financial expertise in forming a holistic development process. As evening approached, Bobby received a message from Tom Henderson that momentarily shifted his attention from ongoing discussions. County commissioners just unanimously approved rezoning for the distribution center expansion, breaking ground next week. The news represented significant progress for Caldwell's largest infrastructure project, a regional distribution hub that would create over 200 local jobs while extending their innovative cold chain system to markets previously beyond practical reach. The unanimous approval reflected growing community recognition of agricultural innovation's economic impact beyond traditional farming boundaries. Sharing the news prompted further discussion about rural economic ecosystems, with Victoria noting parallel developments across their banking network. We're seeing similar initiatives emerging in 3 other communities where traditional agricultural operations are evolving into integrated development hubs. Your model is proving reproducible. With appropriate adaptation to local conditions, Bobby emphasized, ever mindful that agricultural innovation required contextual grounding. What works in Iowa clay won't necessarily transfer to Minnesota sand without modification. That's why regional innovation centers matter. They can adapt general principles to specific conditions. The conversation continued over dinner in the center's cafeteria, where produce from experimental growing systems featured prominently on plates, prepared by culinary students training in farm-to-table techniques. The meal embodied Caldwell's integrated approach: nutritional science, culinary arts, agricultural innovation, and educational development converging in practical implementation. As their discussion expanded to address broader implications for rural sustainability, Bobby found himself increasingly appreciative of the diverse perspectives gathered around the table. Victoria's financial expertise, Sophia's academic research, and the practical wisdom of farmers and students created dialogue richer than any single discipline could generate. "This is what meaningful progress actually looks like," he observed, as conversation flowed between technological possibilities and practical implementations. Not isolated expertise working in disciplinary silos, but integrated knowledge addressing complex challenges through multiple perspectives. The evening concluded with plans for ongoing collaboration. Victoria arranging financial workshops for innovation fund applicants, Sophia establishing research partnerships between Caltech and the Innovation Center, university representatives, developing expanded internship programs, connecting agricultural education with practical implementation. As participants departed into the winter evening, Bobby remained briefly in the now quiet Innovation Center, surrounded by projects at various development stages. 1 year after that fateful encounter at First Liberty Bank, Bobby Caldwell stood amid rows of thriving crops, watching workers load the morning's harvest into refrigerated trucks bearing the Caldwell Agricultural Innovations logo. The distribution center that Harold Pemberton had initially mocked now employed over 200 Millfield residents and had transformed the region's economy. Victoria Chen approached, clipboard in hand and a smile on her face. The Innovation Fund just approved its 50th project. Small farmers in 3 states now have access to capital that traditional banking would have denied them. Bobby nodded, his weathered hands resting comfortably on the fence post. It was never about the money, it was about recognition, seeing potential beyond appearances. Harold Pemberton, now Regional Director of Agricultural Lending, joined them with Emily Torres, recently promoted to Branch Manager. "Your mud-stained boots changed more than just my career," Harold admitted. "They changed how we define value throughout our entire banking system." Bobby's truck, the same worn vehicle that had sparked such judgment, waited nearby, its rust catching the morning sun. Some battles were won by standing firm in work boots rather than changing into wingtips. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.